Hey everyone, let's dive into the interesting concept of the Dorian invasion. So, this idea was developed by historians to explain how the languages and traditions of early Greece were replaced by the ones we associate with classical Greece. The people responsible for this shift were called the Dorians, a group that ancient Greek writers often referred to. Now, there's a legend tied to this event known as the Return of the Heraclidi. According to the story, the descendants of the hero Heracles came back to claim their ancestral lands in the Peloponnese. Historians in the 19th century took this legend and connected it to what they called the Dorian Invasion. Over time, this theory has evolved as historians, linguists, and archaeologists have tried to piece together what actually happened. One mystery that remains is how Dorian culture spread to places like Crete. Despite centuries of research, there's no solid evidence of a large-scale migration or invasion of the Dorians. Some historians even suggest that the Dorians could be linked to the Sea Peoples, a mysterious group active during the collapse of the Late Bronze Age. The whole idea of the Dorian invasion is used to explain the cultural and economic disruptions that followed the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization, leading into what we call the Greek Dark Ages. But as more research is done, the meaning of the Dorian invasion has become a bit hazy. And now let's talk about Kretschmer's theory of external Greeks. Toward the end of the 19th century, Paul Kretschmer, a well-known philologist, argued that the Pelasgian language wasn't Greek at all, but rather a pre-Greek language, possibly with Anatolian roots. He brought up the idea that these Pelasgians were remnants of older populations, kind of tucked away in the remote mountains and coastal areas of southern Greece. This theory painted a picture of Greece before the Greeks, with pockets of ancient people living alongside incoming Greek speakers. Now, Kretschmer's theory put a twist on the idea of where the Greeks actually came from. He didn't think the earliest Greeks, like the Dorians, originated from Thessaly or Macedon, as was commonly believed. Instead, he suggested that the earliest Greeks might have traveled west from the plains of Asia. According to him, the Proto-Greek language started breaking up around 2500 BC, somewhere along this route, far away from Greece itself. Then, in a series of migrations, different Greek tribes made their way into Greece. The Proto-Ionians arrived around 2000 BC, the Proto-Achaeans around 1600 BC, and the Dorians around 1200 BC. What's interesting is that Kretschmer thought archaeology would eventually find this Greek homeland outside of Greece. But despite all the digging and searching, no solid evidence of this external origin was ever found. Even by the mid-20th century, historians were still discussing a Greek invasion. But over time, skepticism grew about the idea of Greek evolving outside Greece, and there just wasn't enough proof to back it up. By the time scholars started decoding the Linear B tablets, an ancient form of Greek, things started to shift. The language on these tablets was unmistakably Greek, and scholars could trace how dialects like Doric and Ionic developed from this early form of Greek, Mycenaean Greek. This was a game changer because it showed that the Greek language was evolving within Greece itself, not outside. Then came a new hypothesis. Some scholars started thinking that maybe Greek wasn't something the early invaders brought with them. Instead, it could have been formed right there in Greece, a blend of languages spoken by invaders and the indigenous people. This was a fresh take, and by the end of the 20th century, it became a widely accepted view. The idea of multiple invasions was losing ground. Instead, it seemed like the Greek dialects might have simply evolved within Greece, without the need for new waves of invaders. And after the Greek Dark Ages, we see a major shift in the Peloponnese. Much of the population started speaking Dorian, but before this, the evidence, like Linear B and literary traditions such as Homer's works, shows that they were speaking Achaean or Mycenaean Greek. The society itself had completely changed as well. It went from being ruled by kings in a palace economy to a caste system, where a Dorian master ethnos took control, like what we see in Sparta. Now, scholar H. Michel brings up an interesting point. If the Dorian invasion actually happened in the 12th century BC, we don't really know anything about the Dorians for the next 100 years, and, according to Bleggin, the Mycenaean world after 1200 BC looks sparsely populated or even abandoned. But here's where things get tricky. There's no clear trace of the Dorians until the geometric period, around 950 BC. This is when we see the introduction of iron weapons, changes in burial practices, and simple pottery styles. These shifts, like cremation and individual burials, are often associated with the Dorians, especially the settlers of Sparta. But these cultural changes weren't limited to just one part of Greece. They were happening all over, and the new weapons people were using don't match the timeline of 1200 BC. This creates a mystery for historians. Why do we talk about a Dorian invasion around 1200 BC when the real evidence of their presence shows up only hundreds of years later, around 950 BC? One possible explanation is that the destruction of 1200 BC wasn't caused by the Dorians at all. Instead, the story of the Dorians returning, known as the Return of the Heracles, may actually refer to their settling in Sparta around 950 BC. Another theory suggests that the destruction of Mycenaean centers like Mycenae, Turins, and Pylos might have been caused by northern tribes moving south, gradually taking over Mycenaean territories. Historians initially tried to explain these changes by studying ancient Greek legends, but later, philologists and archaeologists took over the investigation. The evidence we have now, while fragmented, hints that there's still a lot left to uncover about how the Dorians actually came to dominate Peloponnesian society. What we do know is that the Greek Dark Ages were a period of decline, loss of writing, trade, population, and art quality. This lasted from around 1200 to 750 BC. But what's interesting is that this period doesn't seem to fit the idea of powerful warriors storming into the Peloponnese and taking over. Instead, the Dorians seem to be connected more with the geometric period, which began later and is linked more to Athens, not Sparta. And although the Dorians participated in the geometric period, it remains a puzzle how they came to dominate. The period itself gradually evolved from the proto-geometric, which started around 1050 BC. So, the Dorians probably arrived sometime around then, though we don't have clear evidence of a specific invasion.